Happy Hour Batman. I'm Father Ben, and this is Holy Happy Hour Batman. I'm that gamer priest here on Twitch. I'm an Episcopal priest, co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. And on this show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, I'm joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about life, faith, spirituality, game design philosophy, the tabletop roleplay game industry, and Philadelphia sports sometimes. If Jeff Stormer's on the show, I guess, and whatever else comes up, honestly. So this show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, is a production of allportsopen.com. Allportsopen.com is a collaboration of creative people who think deeply about play. We are founded as a place where people of all worldviews, beliefs, and identities could enjoy and contemplate what it means to play together. You can check out our great lineup of other shows at allportsopen.com. But don't forget that normally on Mondays, our network has back-to-back TTRPG content. Normally we raid right into the Monday Night Crew on the Worst Days channel. They usually play a original horror game from Josh Wise, my co-founder of All Ports Open, called The Worst Days. Last week they play tested a really amazing game. I'll tell you about in a second. But tonight the Monday Night Crew is off, so there's no show after this one tonight. We're just us tonight, folks. We're just us. But yeah, last week they play tested a game called The Hard Lessons. I also got to play test that game over the weekend, and it is really good. It's a narrative, shared storytelling game where you play the former student of a great master. The master has fallen, and you are gathering to tell the stories of that master, their fall, and decide the fate of their school. I loved it. I had an amazing time. I'm not going to take a lot of time right now to talk about it, but it's really, really awesome. So check out Apon Games on Patreon, because I do think that's probably going to be the first release from Apon Games next month. It's really, seriously, I can't tell you how much fun I had playing it. So check out Apon Games on Patreon, and come back next week, because the Monday Night Crew, after next week's show of Holy Happy Hour, will be playtesting another original game coming from Apon Games. So fun stuff over there. I am thrilled this week on Holy Happy Hour Batman to be joined by founder of the Gauntlet, ENnie-winning podcaster, publisher, and EIC of the Codex Zine, publisher of Trophy RPG, head of Gauntlet Publishing. Jason Cordova is going to be joining us in just a few minutes. I'm very, very excited. This is going to be a really good episode. Before that, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. Next Monday, you're going to want to come back here to Holy Happy Hour at the same bat time and same bat channel, because Meg Baker is coming on the show as my guest next Monday. So 7:30 Eastern, just like today. Next Monday, Meg Baker. And then the Monday after that, Epediah Ravishal is coming on the show. So I feel like between Jason tonight, Meg next Monday, and Epediah the Monday after that, if that's not the most appropriate October lineup of guests I could have arranged for it, it was a happy accident. I don't know what that would be. All right, so it is happy hour, and that I see in the chat, solid lineup. I know it's a great lineup. I got very lucky. It is happy hour, and I was trying to come up with some homage to the Gauntlet in our drink. I always create a drink inspired by my guests, so I was trying to come up with some homage to the Gauntlet. And so just the idea of throwing down the gauntlet came into my mind. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to turn the idea of throwing down the gauntlet into a drink, what would it be? And so I came up with my first, this is the Holy Happy Hour Batman first, a shot and a chaser style drink. So basically the drink is really just 2 ounces of overproof rum. You just do a shot, like a double shot or a double shot glass style shot, or this is a large shot glass, 2 ounces of overproof rum, boom, right in the system. And then the chaser is equal parts lemon and lime, 1 ounce of each, a 1/4 ounce of cinnamon syrup, and a 1/2 ounce of demerara syrup, which is a kind of simple syrup. So you prepare the chaser like you would a cocktail, but without any spirits in it, and then pour that into its own shot glass. So then you would have both the overproof rum. So I think it's much less likely any of you out there are going to try this beverage this week. If you do, the rule is always you got to tell me. If you try one of these beverages, you got to tell me what you thought and how it was. But yes, throw down the gauntlet is my submission this week for a beverage inspired by the Gauntlet. So, okay, that's all of our before show stuff. So let's go ahead and bring Jason on the show. I'm going to transition him here. And Jason Cordova, welcome to Holy Happy Hour Batman. How are you?
I am great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really good. What was your impression of, what do you think? I really was not sure how to do an homage to the Gauntlet in drink form.
I think you did really good. And let me tell you why.
Okay.
It might have been an accident on your part, but you did great because people who know me well know that I used to be a sailor and I love that time of my life and I love nautical things.
Yes.
And so rum is a great choice.
Oh my gosh, total happy accident. That's awesome.
Yeah. Rum's a great choice. You did great.
I love that. Yeah, so it's so funny because I was like, my default drinks are like that style of drink, right? Like rum is my main spirit. I usually work with lime and different syrups and Caribbean inspired drinks and stuff. But I was like, how can I? And I had a bunch of limes here, and I'm like, how can I squeeze the Gauntlet or something you do into that mold, not knowing that about you?
Right,
and that was partially where the idea of throwing down the Gauntlet came from. I was like, well, you do a shot of rum real quick,
if I come on again, you have to make a drink inspired by Fear of a Black Dragon, my podcast. Like a Black Dragon themed drink would be pretty dope. So.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, there you go. You just invited yourself back in the show, which is great because then I don't have to awkwardly be like, oh, I hope this person would come back on my show. So yeah, we'll have to get you back on the show sometime, and we can definitely create a Black Dragon inspired. What would even be in a Black Dragon? Well, black rum maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. But I do know that like the logo is very like kind of, it's this like really hot green logo with the black dragon on it. So maybe like some kind of green drink, although I'm personally a big fan of like grasshoppers and stuff like that. but mint stuff. So I don't know, something with I don't know, like what's another green liquor? I don't even know.
Green liquor. Oh, Midori. What did you say? You said something already. You said.
Oh yeah, Midori. Midori would be great. Yeah,
Midori
something Midori.
Yeah. People are throwing drink suggestions in the chat. I love it. So,
that's good.
So Zach's in the chat. Hi, Zach. And Zach said the between cocktail. I thought of that. I thought of trying to come up with something inspired by the between. And then I think Blake Ryan.
That's just absinthe, though, right?
Yeah, just absinthe. We could do it. We could easily come up with an absinthe cocktail or an absinthe wash type drink for sure.
Yeah.
And then Blake Ryan says Coke, vodka, dash of Midori that's a Black Dragon suggestion.
I think that would be that sounds pretty good to me. Yeah.
And absinthe is also a green drink. Chaotic Blade says that's great.
There we go.
So thank you all for participating in the drink portion of the episode, which usually the drink in you got. I forgot to get myself water before this, which is when you're doing an interview show. Bad news bears. Usually the drink portion of Holy Happy Hour Batman happens real fast and just kind of goes by before the guest comes on, and then we don't dwell in it. And last week actually, Jeff Stormer was on, and we talked about. We talked about eggnog for the first, 10 minutes of the show. And now this week we talked about drink. So we're getting the show where I wanted to go.
It's the holiday season. This is the kind of thing that people are thinking about. You can be forgiven, right? So,
No, this is where we're making progress towards my vision of my own show that I want to talk about drinks. The holiday season, like in this one, it's funny. I have not done any spooky inspired drinks yet this October. Well, I guess I will. I don't know what I'm going to do for Meg Baker next week. And then, of course, with Epidaya coming on in 2 weeks, I will undoubtedly do a Dread-inspired.
Oh, yeah, something red with like a really like just looks like a shot glass full of blood. That's what you want to do with Effie, right?
Yes. I'll have to really think about what direction I want to go in for having Meg Baker on. Do I want to...
You know what? Here's a tip. So Meg put out this collection of games probably like 5 or 6 years ago that I love called Playing Nature's Year. And it is it's essentially like a calendar of little story games. And so maybe you could do something inspired by like the number 12 or inspired by nature or the calendar. And that's just a tip. So,
yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
This is good. This is what
Sorry, I've got loads of ideas.
Please.
Another game that Meg published is called Siren, which is wonderful. And in that game, the characters are followed by antagonists called the Chasers. So see, like get the Chaser and like, I don't know, just, some ideas.
Mm-hmm. That's good. This is what I need. I need other people to help me because sometimes I'll be like, I have nothing this week. I feel no.
Well, I happen to know that Western Mass crowd really well, so it's part of that. I'm particularly helpful for those two guests. So yeah.
Right. Well, I've been lucky to have some of them on the show. And continuing to have someone on the show. So that's actually a really, interesting question. How did that end up happening? Where you said the Western Mass crowd.
So I mean, not super well, but I mean,
sure.
I guess, I've had them on my shows and stuff before, and we all used to go to the double exposure conventions in New Jersey. So like Metatopia and Dreamation in particular. And so when you go to those conventions, you run into the Western Mass crowd, which is, Megan Vincent and Epi, Hannah Schaefer, and, folks like that. So,
cool.
But so, I mean, we kind of, we know each other well in the way that acquaintances at conventions, I guess. Right. Yeah. Industry people. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sad that, this is going to sound, do you have this experience? I have the experience where I'm about to say something that relates to the pandemic. And then I'm like, stop myself because I remember that like, it's such a first world problem in the sense that like I'm about to say like, I regret that I didn't make it to Metatopia before the pandemic because then everything stopped and and who knows when I'll make it again. But then I feel guilty feeling that way about the pandemic. Does that make any sense?
It's a rarefied, exceptional time. Everybody's going through it right now, and there are lots of things that suck about it. And sometimes those things are really serious and sometimes they're less serious. And I think it's okay. You get to have the full spectrum of human emotion about it. Right. So that's my feeling on it.
Okay. So. I just find myself catching myself when I'm going to say like something like that or just feeling guilty about it, as if that's like but you're right. I mean, I was just talking about this in a churchy way earlier with someone from church that I don't think we understand or even close to really understanding the full ramifications of the impact of the pandemic on all of us and our lives and every aspect of our lives from an institutional to a personal level. That like small change is hard to go through and again, I'm talking about from like a church context, but it could be, an industry context or whatever other context, like any institution really, like small change has so many ripple effects at a church. Like this is change on a level that we can hardly fathom is like what the last year.
And I think we'll be fathoming it for years. Exactly. Right. I mean, I don't think we've even begun. We probably barely scratched the surface of like all the ramifications of the last year and a half. Right. I mean, it's sadly what seems like it's going to be an ongoing thing for a bit in the United States. Right. So, and I think it's an opportunity, I think, to reassess things and to like get a fresh perspective on things, which is good. And I think that like we can kind of see a lot of that happening, for example, in the labor market right now, but everybody, I think it's an opportunity to sort of like really just sort of step back and sort of reevaluate things. I went through a really bad health scare right before the pandemic. Oh, wow. And I was kind of just coming out of that. And so I was already sort of like in this mode of I'm changing things for myself. Like I'm not going to be the person I was before because I don't know how much more time I have left. Right. And so I guess I've kind of been in that headspace for a bit, but so the pandemic wasn't as bad for me in that regard because of that. But I sympathize, right? I get it. Yeah.
Just as a quick word, Josh, my Apon co-founder, mentioned in the chat that either I needed to come up in volume or you needed to come down. So I raised my gain, and so people might need to adjust their volume now, but we'll see if hopefully you'll let me know when we're talking
Am I
here.
still too loud? Or,
if you're good. So we'll see what people say about that. If they put it in the chat, I'll try to just fiddle with it as we go here. But I was going to ask, actually, substantively, based on what you were saying, though, I was going to ask you, like, how is that the case for the work that you do, like, especially with the Gauntlet or anything that you do? Like, do you see? Did you have to make shifts? What kind of shifts what have you made, with the pandemic in mind?
It actually wasn't a very big transition for us, because all of our operations are online, right? We don't have any face-to-face like events or anything, and we already had a very robust and vibrant kind of game calendar. Like, I should say kind of what we do. So like the Gauntlet, structurally is divided up into sort of three big parts, right? The first is it's essentially like the community part, which is like a gaming calendar. And so we have many people who kind of sign up for games and they play games online, and we always have like a couple hundred sessions on the calendar at any time. And it's something we've been doing for a long time, but it's all online, right? So that was not bothered by the pandemic at all. And then we have the podcast part of the Gauntlet. I co-host two of those podcasts, Fear of a Black Dragon, which is about the OSR, and the Trophy Podcast, which is about the trophy role-playing game. And then we have the publishing part, right? But our operations were already so online that it really wasn't a big transition, if I'm being honest. If anything, it was probably an opportunity to show people our skills, because a lot of people were suddenly having to play games online and they weren't having to do that before.
Yeah.
And so it was a really good opportunity for us to kind of show, okay, look, these are our best practices for online role-playing gameplay. This is what we do. These are the tools that we use. Lowell Francis and his crew over on the community side, they started doing these open gaming weekends where anybody could just like come and game with the Gauntlet for a weekend. And part of that was to show people like online play. And so I think we actually were really well suited to the moment as far as that goes. But, yeah.
Did the community around the Gauntlet grow during the pandemic?
I have been really, really focused on the publishing side of things, so I can't really say for sure. I don't really manage the community side anymore.
Sure.
But I know that our business grew a lot because I think that people were had a lot more time to spend on things like role-playing games, right? And so we just, I think everybody on the indie side of the industry saw like a lot of gains in that way, right? And so, but during the pandemic, we started a couple of Discords that we didn't have Discord servers before. We started one for just the publishing part of the Gauntlet, and then we started another one for Trophy. And yeah, those are pretty decent size. Because people are just sort of, I think more and more people are coming by necessity, are sort of like saying, okay, I need to find a game to play, so online is what I'm going to do. These folks know what they're doing when it comes to online role-playing games. And our thing is we don't view playing role-playing games online as we don't view it as like a compromise. Like we embrace it, like we have our tools, we have our things that we do, our techniques, and so for us it's we like to show that to people.
Well, as you said, it was already what you were doing before the pandemic, and then suddenly, like, everybody was trying to play online, and that's just what that's what your community was already. It was your identity already.
Right,
That's what you did. So, I think that phrase is interesting. That we show people what we do well. People are chatting in the chat there. I know from the recent GCOG that a good chunk of games had a lot of new players. Yeah, in response to whether or not the Gauntlet was growing. So tell us a little bit of. I want to kind of get your origin story. I kind of want to get. We could work backwards and start with the origin of the Gauntlet, and then go even more backwards into your personal origin story if you want, or I guess however you feel like telling it.
Sure,
But
yeah. So my role-playing game origin story is pretty close to my life origin story.
Yeah.
So in temporally speaking,
you were born with a die in hand.
Exactly. I came out of the womb holding it,
bearing dice.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it was a crit fail. No. So I started playing role-playing games in the 4th grade. My very first game was Marvel Superheroes, and
awesome.
I'm kind of dating myself a little bit here, but my dad used to take me to this comic book shop. This was in the like mid to late 80s in California, and we would go to this comic book shop, and I saw the Marvel Superheroes box set on the shelf, and I didn't know what it was. I knew that it was a game of some sort, and so my dad bought it for me, and then I spent weeks not knowing what to do with it. I read the books. It was so complex for a 4th grader. I didn't really know what any of it meant. It just was a complete like black box. I had no idea what it was. And then an older kid came over and ran it for me because he knew what role-playing games were. And so he ran it for me, and I will never forget the scenario. The scenario was I was playing a villain, and I was robbing a jewelry store. And I remember the moment where he kind of told me, you know, okay, it's nighttime. There's a door, there's a glass window, so it's such and such. And he said, so what do you do? And I distinctly remember saying, like, well, what do you mean, what do I do? He's like, well, what do you do? And I was like, well, I can just do anything. And he's like, yeah, just say what you do. And that freedom, that sort of like, what do you do, like kind of aspect of role-playing games that kind of doesn't exist in any other medium, right? Really hooked me. And I've been hooked ever since, mostly ever since. Like I took off a few years in the aughts, but then I kind of came back later. So
no, it's such a great role-playing game origin story, and I feel like anyone who loves TTRPGs can relate to that feeling you just described of hearing for the first time, what do you do?
Yeah.
And like it's such a, it's funny, yeah, right? Because like I'm just thinking, like it's such an iconic phrase for TTRPGs. I mean, and then it's also, I mean, it's to a point where it's obvious, but I don't know if it's like it's an important. It is the crucial question. It's like to the point where like PBTA talks about that, right? Power by the Apocalypse talks about
it's the key thing the GM says, right? Like what do you do, right? Yeah, absolutely. And I even remember when I first read, it wasn't Apocalypse World. I read Dungeon World first, but I remember that's in there too. You know, it's like, well, then you ask, what do you do? And like, and I remember that I put 2 and 2 together. You know, I was like, oh, here's a game that speaks to the way I learned how to play role-playing games. It speaks to my experience with role-playing games, which I think is why it was so, why Dungeon World especially really grabbed me, because it reminded me of my time back then, like in middle school and high school playing. We mostly played 2nd edition AD&D, but the way we played 2nd edition AD&D was kind of how Dungeon World worked. And so like there were Powered by the Apocalypse games especially really like tapped into something for me, right, in terms of like how I like to play and how I like to run games. And that phrase, what do you do, is a really important part of it.
Yeah. So I have played the old Marvel superhero game you're talking about, because
Face rip.
Yeah. So I have a friend who loves that game. Once desperately wanted us to play it. We did, and he had us go up against like the most B or C level like Marvel villains that he had in his. Guy used to own a comic book shop. He has like thousands of issues in his basement that for the 90s that no one's ever read, and so when you say that, that's the only thing I can. That's my whole experience of that game, and my experience of that game was ridiculous. Like it was a ridiculous series of sessions. Yeah, I don't. That's all I have to say about that. But
no, that's okay. Yeah. Well, my experience with it, we played it a fair amount, but more than playing it, honestly, we would like. My friends and I during recess would just like stat things out in that game, like let's do all the Mega Man bosses, but in Marvel superheroes,
That's
like
awesome.
Let's do this. So we would make little stat blocks for like non-Marvel things in it.
So you were designing games in like elementary school.
Yeah, I guess
school,
so. Yeah. I was a deeply nerdy, unpopular kid, and but role-playing games were definitely like a thing that my friends and I enjoyed, and it was something we did, and we could like just go wander off at recess or wherever and, you know, and do stuff like that. And it was great. I mean, it was kind of a lifesaver in a way, because like up until that point, well, even after that point, but I was pretty badly bullied, and like I had like no friends. And so like role-playing games are actually kind of how I even like started to like have friends, or like, you know, be, you know, social with people and stuff. So yeah, it was important.
Yeah. So how did you end up getting into the industry?
That's a fairly, I consider it a fairly recent thing, but other people don't. Depends on how you define it, I guess. But
Sure.
I probably should say how the Gauntlet got started, I guess. So in 2013, in early 2013, like February, I had moved to Houston, and I was not thrilled by the gaming options that were available to me in Houston. And at that time, I had kind of just came back to role-playing games after kind of a break from them. And I was really getting into like indie role-playing games. I was very excited about Burning Wheel, for example, but also like some of the much smaller press stuff that sort of came out of the Forge and stuff like that. And so I was looking for just a gaming group, but like everybody was just doing Pathfinder at that time. This is a pre-5e world, right? So everything was just Pathfinder. And so I went on G+, and G+, there was a Houston gaming group. It was called the Gauntlet. It existed before me as this, essentially it was a community on G+, and it was defunct. There was no activity on it. Nobody had been doing anything with it for a long time. And so I just posted, hey, I just moved here. I'm really interested in running this game and this game and this game. Does anybody want to take me up on this? And someone did. My friend Carrie, and we went and played at his office on Friday nights. We got a few other people who eventually got excited about it. And so we met every Friday, and then every Friday turned into every Wednesday and every Friday, and then sometimes on Sundays. And so we were playing a lot of games over the course of a year or so. And that was the sort of how the Gauntlet as it is today got started. Like it was a face-to-face group in Houston, and that still exists, by the way. They still meet. They have the really big group over there still.
Oh, wow. That's
and
awesome.
Yeah. And so kind of like in 2014, late 2014, we started the Gauntlet Podcast, and the Gauntlet Podcast was focused on indie role-playing games. I was one of the original co-hosts of that, and that was sort of how we started to be on the radar of people outside of our little bubble in Houston, right? We started to get in touch with some other indie designers, and sort of we had them on the show. We did different things, and it just kind of grew out from there. We eventually had a whole slate of podcasts. We did one for Dungeon World called Discern Realities. Right. That one's no longer being produced, but it was really popular at the time. And then we did Plus One Forward, which is still going. That's Rich Rogers and Rach Shelke's show about Powered by the Apocalypse games. And then later came Fear of the Black Dragon, which is my show. And and we've had some AP podcasts in there at different times. So we kind of became like a podcasting thing, right? Really focused on indie games. And then in late 2016, we published our first thing, which was the Codex Magazine. This was a very small, it was just like 10 pages of like mostly Dungeon World and Urban Shadows content that we put out for our Patreon supporters as kind of a little bonus for our Patreon supporters. And that's all that was ever meant to be. And that's all it ever was for a couple of years. It was just like a little Patreon bonus because we needed to pay the bills. And so we wanted to give the Patreon supporters something to have for their pledge. And but that kind of grew and grew. And then we eventually started doing standalone games. And so our first standalone game that we sort of took to Kickstarter was Hearts of Wulin, which is like a wuxia melodrama game. And that's just now getting ready to be fulfilled, thank goodness. And then our really, really big hit was Trophy, which came a little bit later. And I have our focus right now, in addition to Trophy and Hearts of Wulin, is are my two games, Brindlewood Bay and The Between. And we have, at this point, we have a whole schedule now of like releases coming in the next year or two, right? Like we have it all mapped out and ready to go. So yeah, it kind of just started as a group of people playing games together in Houston, and it kind of grew into these other things. And now here we are, and now it's my job, which is great. It's exciting. I was a lawyer before this. I still do pro bono work, but but kind of part-time. And yeah, that's basically it. That's sort of how we got.
Yeah.
That's the whole timeline.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So I'm curious when you all started in like 2013, the early days of that, the 2013, 2014, like what games were you all playing at that point? Like what were the early games?
yeah. So we did play little bit of Burning Wheel. That didn't go over as great as you might imagine, or maybe you do imagine. I don't know, but I was very excited by it, but it was not a big hit.
Fair enough.
And no, our main game was Dungeon World at that time.
Okay.
That was the game we played a lot of. But we played loads of games. I mean, if it was a game that was like, especially a story game kind of coming out of like the Forge diaspora or out of Google Plus, like that was our sort of gaming territory, and that's what we did. We did a little bit of OSR stuff, not too much, and we would occasionally do something more traditional like Savage Worlds or something like that. But for the most part, we were really, really focused on these small, discrete experiences, right? I mean, Inspectors, the Shop Al-Hiri Roach, Siren, like I just mentioned, things like that, all of Vincent Baker's games, all of Emily Carrot Boss's games. Like, I mean, these were very, very fairly niche, but really doing really cool things mechanically. I mean, it was a really, really exciting time in terms of like trying new things out and seeing what the limits of a role-playing game are, and what the boundaries are and what you can do with it, what kinds of stories you can tell with it,
Right.
And lots of Powered by the Apocalypse games. I mean, that eventually took over the whole community. It's very, very PBTA focused community now.
Right.
But yeah, that's but our big sort of anchor central game was Dungeon World for sure.
Yeah.
So.
And Dungeon World is essentially like my first experiences of what the Gauntlet is as a thing that exists was through, the podcast and through like Dungeon World. So it's not that surprising, but I'm just trying, I was not even sure. I was just trying to remember my own memory of like indie games and when I was first experiencing them. Like, well, what were we playing in 20? Not for my group. I was not playing PBTA that early. I was not playing Powered by the Apocalypse quite at that point yet. But yeah, no, I was just curious what all back then in those early days. What was the what was the thing? What was being played? Yeah, but that is an exciting time. And today is definitely a different time as far as indie TTRPGs. Like, what do you see as being like the difference between now and like that time as far as, because indie games are just in a different place now, I feel like.
I think they are. They really are. So obviously the big sort of thing that you have to kind of acknowledge is itch.io, right? Itch.io is really interesting to me. It sometimes feels like a bit of a fire hose. Like there's lots of stuff coming out of that scene, right? I try to keep up with it as best I can. The folks at the Gauntlet Podcast do a pretty good job with that because they play lots of those games and cover them, which is great. But that's where a lot of the like energy and creativity seems to be to me, as far as like the non-OSR part of the indie hobby.
Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting. It's just a lot, right? It's a lot. And I think that what itch.io really, I hope they someday get is just like a better way to browse games and a better way to like sort of curate the experience a little bit, because it's really difficult for me. You have to really know who to follow, right? To like find out about things, right? Yeah.
My whole experience of itch is like through a creator. So like, a creator refers to their work on the platform, you use their link, and then you browse their work. And
and you had to hear about it on Twitter or something, right? Like it's the kind of the thing that happened that was really tragic, I think, is when Google Plus closed down. You had this, I call it the G Plus diaspora, which is like this G Plus was a huge, thriving, creative space for role-playing games. And when it closed, all those communities, all those groups, all those people who knew how to find each other and were in the same place essentially, went to lots of different places. And there are people from the G Plus days that I have not kept in touch with, which I'm really sad about. Like I don't know how to get in touch with them, And so you had different things kind of happening that sort of rose up in the wake of that, and I think itch is one of those things. I think the other sort of thing that you have to really talk about was, as far as like indie games go, is the OSR slash art punk slash whatever acronym they're using these days, sort of thing, right? That scene is, even though I have a podcast about that scene and about the modules in that scene, I'm not super in that scene. I play those modules, but I'm not like super in tune with the actors in that scene, right? But it seems to be a very vibrant, big scene, right? And lots of cool stuff coming out of it. Like, it seems like every day. And that's very like blog driven though, right? So you got to know which blogs to go to learn about that stuff, right? So it's kind of hard to find things nowadays as compared to when G Plus was a thing. For me, that's been my experience. And so it really kind of does come down to like, who do you follow? What Discords are you in? Like, who do you know? It's all just so split up, which I think is really unfortunate. And that environment does favor people who are able to platform their games, right? I mean, my games, Brindlewood Bay and The Between, they had a big leg up in the fact that they had the Gauntlet behind them, right? And I don't know if they would have found an audience otherwise, right? I mean, I'd like to think they would have, but I don't know if they would have. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. You say because we are at Apon Games, just launching our small narrative story type games. That hits a nerve because we feel it too. And of course we have to some degree a platform, right? Like we have podcasts, we have streams, we have like that. A lot of people who design, maybe they don't have any of that. They just have, hey, I'm sharing this in communities online. I'm sharing this on a Discord server. I'm sharing it through a Roll20 community or whatever it is, and trying to get it out there. But yes, it definitely is certainly what was the phrase used? Like a leg forward, like having a platform to.
It helps, right? It's not everything, but it definitely helps. I mean, the way we kind of do things is we launch a game first to our Patreon supporters, and then those people kind of help us get the word out, right? And then we can talk about it on podcasts and stuff, and that's a big advantage, But we spent years and years and years building that advantage. So, and the payoff is kind of, I still wouldn't say it's dramatic. Like we do okay, but it's always going to be kind of a niche business, right? So.
Okay, sorry, I got distressed because there was a comment in the chat about the sound looping over itself, but it seems like it might be, it might just be on the person's own side, not on our side. Phew! I was like, I always have some sort of technical stuff always seems to happen on these things. So I apologize. I got derailed by that just now.
No, it's okay.
Well, you were bringing out the OSR stuff, and you said that you don't actually have necessarily that much you're not that necessarily in tune with it, because I was going to ask you about the OSR thing. I was going to ask you where you thought the OSR thing was coming from, and the like what was fueling all the OSR. I don't know, maybe you don't have an answer to that, but
no, I do. Because I do have I do think about it a lot, and I talk about it a lot, right? But I should just say that I just mean like the creative part of it. Sure. Like I don't know the creatives in that scene very well, but but yeah, the OSR is fascinating. I think that it has meant different things over the years. It has a history of bad actors that it's been trying to shake for a long time. I think it's pretty well shaken out now at this point, but that's something that is definitely a thing that wasn't the case, and you had to kind of deal with it, It's always been a very, very interesting space, because I think that there is, I think whether we like it or not, in this hobby, there's a large number of people who just want to be in dungeons, right? Like they just want to be crawling around in dungeons.
Yeah, right, sure.
And so that there will always be an appeal to that, right? There will always be a large fan base for that kind of role-playing game, because for a lot of people, that's what role-playing games are, right? They can't even like conceive of the idea of a role-playing game being about a group of old women who solve murder mysteries or Victorian monster hunters, right? Like to them, it's like you're in a dungeon. That's what a role-playing game is. And so what I think is great about the OSR and the art punk movement and some of these other sort of like related scenes is Sword Dream. These related scenes is that they're at least trying to do something exciting and interesting within that context, right? Within the dungeon crawling context, right? So it's like, here's the thing you love, but here's the thing you love, like with some wild new ideas. It's not just mind flayers and displacer beasts and gelatinous cubes, right? It's like these really cool, like kind of colorful, vibrant settings. It's these weird cosmic horror. It's sometimes it's very like visceral, gory horror. It's very black metal, as in case of like Mukborg. So I think that's kind of why it's such a active, vibrant thing. And I think it's just because there's a great big part of the hobby that just dungeons are what they want to do. So there will always be somebody to put a new spin on it. You know? So.
Yeah, and I do think like maybe there's something about like the timing of the throwback feels right to me. I don't know if I can really fully put my finger on why that is the case, but it does feel.
You think about pop culture things, right? Like you think about Stranger Things. I think Stranger Things is when the OSR had its first like big moment, right? Because here was a show where they're playing old D&D, right? Sure. And so there was like suddenly a lot of interest in this, right? Now there were OSR systems before that, obviously, right. But like. But that was really when, like, I think a lot of people started to think about, like, oh, I used to love playing D&D when I was a kid, or, oh, look at this thing that they're doing. That looks cool. And of course, obviously, 5e benefited from all that, you know, in a huge way. But I think the OSR is part of that as well, right? I remember when Stranger Things came out. That would have been like what 2015 or 16, something like that.
Something like that.
And I remember that was when I personally started to hear about a lot of things in that scene that I had not been aware of yet, you know? And I think it's because people were just kind of getting jazzed up about the idea of old D&D. So,
yeah. And plus, like, you know, you make a really good point because, you know, the aesthetic was infusing again into pop culture. And like, so, you know, the look and the look of the 80s, the look of AD&D, the even now the look of the 90s, I think is like the aesthetic of those periods is like really catchy for people.
Well, it's a nostalgia for what we think things were like, right? And that's really important. Like it's not exactly what they were like, but it's like I have this idea of what I imagine they were like, and I want to be a part of that, right? Whether I'm in that age cohort or not, I want to be kind of a part of like what that aesthetic was, what that feeling was, you know, just the idea of just being in a room full of people, like a room full of your friends, like doing this activity, right? I mean, I think that, you know, to some degree in role-playing games, we're sort of selling that, right? We're selling this like, you know, you're kind of selling, like I'm selling my childhood to you, right? Like when I write a dungeon for Trophy Gold, I'm packaging up like the things that I loved as a kid, elevating them for like adult me, but then giving them to you, and you're getting like a little bit of like what my gaming was like, right? And I think that's where a lot of it comes from, right? It's like you're communicating like between generations, right? And I think that's pretty cool.
That is really an interesting way of thinking about it. Like selling my childhood in the sense of like you said, elevating it up. That's fascinating to me. I hadn't thought about it quite like that before, as far as your own childhood. But I do wonder though, like that nostalgia. I mean, this is the good side of nostalgia impulse, right?
Sure.
Like,
there's always the bad side.
Right.
Yeah.
There is the other side of it, of course. And like I work in the church, so like I often will say something like, people want things to go back to their false memory of how things were.
Right. Yeah.
It's not accurate. It's not what it was. Yeah. But it's interesting because what you're describing now is like the good side of that, right? Like I sometimes I do want to, sometimes I get nostalgic for when I first started playing. My first role-playing game was Dungeons and Dragons, as for many people in the hobby it is. And my first edition was 3rd edition, which I don't play anymore, and I don't even really play D&D very much, if ever anymore. I convinced my last few remaining D&D friends to play Dungeon World with me finally after a lot of effort. So like I kind of, you know, but my point is that I still have nostalgia for what though? For like the feelings and sort of experiences that we had, less so than say like I don't really have nostalgia for 3rd edition.
Right, exactly.
But I do
I
it.
think
Yeah.
that's the right way to look at it. I mean, I don't have any desire to play 2E, right? I mean, that was my edition that I came up with, and I don't care to go back to Thaco and Descending Armor class or anything like that, right? Although I'm happy to defend them when the need arises, but I don't have any desire to go back to that. But I do, yeah, I want that feeling. I mean, to some degree, the Gauntlet itself was really the product of me remembering what it was like to do all night, weekend long gaming benders with my friends in school, right? I mean that was kind of the passion level we were playing at, especially in those early days in Houston. I mean, we weren't doing like overnight things or whatever. We were doing as much as grown adults with jobs could do.
Right.
But we were capturing a little bit of that feeling, right? I mean, there was this sense of like, we're doing something really cool here, and this is really exciting, and I love it. And and in this day and age, it's really hard to even have friends. It's really hard to even like do things out socially with people, right? Like, I mean, how many times have you had like plans get canceled, right? I mean, because it's just a thing, you know? And I think that that's a big part of it. I mean, it's you know, I'm personally really, really good at like selling my version of role-playing games, my dream of role-playing games, right? That's what I'm good at. That's why the Gauntlet is what it is. But it's real too. You know, it's like I want you to, you know, I love it. And now I want to, you know, I want to know these new things, right? It's these new games, right? That's what I'm really interested in. And even more currently, it's this games I'm making, right? That's actually a fairly new thing for me, making a game, right? And so, but it all kind of boils down to this like sort of good nostalgia, right? There's obviously bad parts of nostalgia. I mean, nostalgia's been used in politics and other aspects of society to hold people down forever, right? But it's not always all bad, you know.
I was going to say, make role-playing games great again. No, I shouldn't.
No.
I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. So, like, along these lines from the chat, the communicating things across generations is really cool to me. Zach wrote this. One big appeal to OSR to me is that all the game designers I respect have talked with at least some modicum of nostalgia for old school gaming. And so, as he said, he has a lot of curiosity around that. I wonder if that's what he's saying is that the nostalgia is that's interesting, because I do think that you can see someone else's nostalgia, and this is kind of what you were just talking about, what you're good at, right? You can you believe in it, you love it, like you love this stuff, and you're good at it because you're speaking from that passion to some level. There's other skills maybe involved too, but part of it is that you're speaking from that passion. And so I might not have, let's say I'm not someone who has the same nostalgia. Maybe I didn't play role-playing game. Maybe I'm 20 years old and I didn't grow up playing role-playing games, but then I encounter you and I hear your nostalgia for something I never experienced, and suddenly I have a desire for that nostalgia. Does that make sense? I think that can happen with nostalgia.
I do think that is what happens to some degree. I mean, I think that there are lots of, like, for me, there are lots of moments in my, I don't know, we'll call it my gaming career or whatever, where it feels like I've really like achieved a milestone sort of thing, right? And whether that be like, oh, I first discovered Dungeon World, or oh, I ran my first game of Apocalypse World, or oh, I did this or I did that. And I love that feeling of like, I've achieved something. I've accomplished another achievement in gaming, right? And so for me, a lot of what I like to do, you know, this is where podcasts come from, and this is where, like, you know, I'm really, really interactive on our Discord, like with like fans of my games and stuff, right? I love it when like a younger GM or or like somebody who's fairly new to the hobby sort of like has that aha moment, right? Like, I love playing a small part and giving people that aha moment. And so when on my podcasts, I talk a lot about, you know, I talk about the hobby really a lot of times through the lens of like craft, like GMing as a craft, playing as a craft, as a skill that you can get better at, right? And my games, in particular The Between, is written really carefully with it's written really carefully for the person who like is actually going to sit down and run it, right? And then that sounds weird to say because I think everyone hopes their games are going to get run, and that's, you know, hopefully they do. But I was thinking about the eventual GM every step of the way, right? Like, how do I support the GM at every moment in this game, right? Because I want them to play the Between, or to play Brindlewood Bay, or to play Trophy, which I'm not the creator of, but I'm very involved in. I want them to have that like aha moment, right? I want them to have that like threshold moment where they're like, whoa, I did this, right? Like, I did this. We had such a badass time. It was so fun. And I want to keep doing this, right? Like, the Between is really, really interesting because, and Brindlewood Bay too. But I'll get emotional here, so I'm trying not to, but like, there are people who like play these two games and they play them like from character creation till the end of the campaign, right? Like, they do the whole thing. And that's like it's like such amazing validation, because that's all I ever want. That's all I've ever wanted people to do with my games, right? I just want them to just pick them up, understand how to run it, understand how to play it, and then do the whole thing, you know? And I love that because it feels like I've been in communication with them. I've like connected with them. And in some sense, we've kind of had the experience together. And I love that, you know? So I get emotional about it. Like, it's a really emotional thing for me.
It's really powerful. Well, I was thinking about the way you were describing, like, the experience of writing for the GM. And what I think I heard from you in there is that, like, to me, maybe it's like, maybe there's different ways of writing a book. Like, you might write a role-playing game, you know, you're of course writing it to be played, and you're writing rules, and you're writing helpful things for the people who will eventually play it. But it sounded like you were specifically, like, the entire time imagining the, like, person. So not like the theoretical people, but like you're an imaginary person who would therefore be picking it up, and you're trying to like help them along the way at every step.
100%. I mean, and it happens at every level, especially in the Between. I was much more conscious of it in the Between. At every step, I was super conscious, like at every level of the design, from like these sort of procedures in the game to the actual like rules and mechanics, to the text itself. Like, every part of it is made to be played, every bit of it, right? Like, it was all designed with players and GMs in mind. Like, it was like, this was not me trying to have an artistic expression, although certainly there was an artistic expression. It wasn't me trying to make a point about anything in particular. I wrote the game like really explicitly, really intentionally to be played to completion. And so what I'm finding is a lot of people do that. They play the whole campaign, and that just feels great, because like that's what I set out to do. So I was gonna
say, no wonder then you know that you would then have that very powerful experience of when people do, feeling like you went on the journey with them, because you did.
Absolutely. And like, when Brindlewood Bay was first kind of, you know, the first like year or so when Brindlewood Bay first came out, Brindlewood Bay is a game about elderly women in a seaside Massachusetts town who solve murders, a la Murder, She Wrote. But as they solve the murders, they realize that there's a dark occult conspiracy that's behind it. So it has kind of Lovecraftian vibes as well. When Brindlewood Bay the first year or so, I would get messages from people who were like, I've never run a game before. Like, I've literally never GM'd a game. And we had such a great time. And like, I just, oh God, that like, that's my heart, cool. Like, it's like my heart. Like, whenever I get a message like that, it's like the best. So
yeah, but best. There's the other side of that coin too, which is the negative feedback. No, maybe not for you. Yet, so.
Have not experienced this yet, Ben. So, maybe that's something other people experience now. I mean, I'm sure maybe just people maybe people are too polite to tell me. I don't know, but I have not had any yet though. So
that's well, I can't relate to that as someone who creates stuff and puts it out on the internet. I just don't spend time on Reddit. That's my experience.
That's fair. Yeah.
Like, if you want to post your stuff about your games on Reddit, like, I feel like most of the people who comment on Reddit, it's because they have something negative to say.
That is true. I do remember one negative comment about Brindlewood Bay it was on Reddit,
of course,
and they were basically saying like they thought either the horror elements or the cozy elements would flatten out because that you couldn't have both at the same time. And I'm not on Reddit, so I didn't respond, but someone responded for me, and they were like, well, I've played it the whole way through, and it doesn't. So it's fine.
By the way, Blake Ryan says in the chat, a month after their game of Between finished, they still talk about it a month later.
It's good. Oh, yeah.
So that's cool. Yeah. That's really cool. Well, yeah, so tell us when you, let's see, which of those games you just mentioned that you designed? Let's talk about Between, I guess. Sure, like, where did that how did that get born?
Yeah, so I love this show called Penny Dreadful. It was a show on Showtime like 4 or 5 years ago, and I loved it. And I got to the second episode of that, and I was like, holy shit, this needs to be a game. And that's it. So that's the whole origin story of the Between. I wanted to make Penny Dreadful the game, and this would have been like 2018 or so, and and so I began like really just kind of within the Gauntlet sort of workshopping ideas for like, well, what, how do you suppose this game might go? How do we capture the Penny Dreadful feel, and so on and so forth. I worked up a really quick like kind of playtest version of it, and I playtested it quite a bit, this playtest version, pretty much throughout 2018 and into 2019, and I eventually realized I had a major problem with it. That major problem. So the major problem I had with it, I should say, The Between is a game about monster hunters in Victorian era London, which is what Penny Dreadful is about. I ran into this major issue, which was I, as the GM, know how to run the game, and I know how to make it work, and I know how to and I have scenarios in my head, right, that I can just like, so that, the player facing stuff is all done and they just interact with what I have in my head, and it works great. But I didn't know how to translate what was in my head into a usable form for other GMs. And I knew I wanted it to be kind of a mystery game. And so I didn't really have a framework for how the mystery should work. Right. And so what I did instead is I wrote Brindlewood Bay. I wrote Brindlewood Bay as a sort of proof of concept for how the mystery system would work. So I wrote that game, put that game out, got that out in the world, and was really happy with how the mystery system worked. And so then I went back to The Between, and I finished up The Between with everything I'd learned from Brindlewood Bay, and made some adjustments and changes to make it more appropriate for the game that it was and the genre that it's in. And kind of expanded the mystery system a little bit for The Between. But that was how I did it, though. I mean, the design was very much like, I love this TV show. I love the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I love The Picture of Dorian Gray. I love other British horror classics. I want to make a game about it. I knew it was going to be powered by the apocalypse in some way, and I ran into a brick wall, so I wrote another game to like solve a problem. And then once the problem was solved, I went back to it, and we put that out. The Between came out in July, and so it's a baby game, very new, and the response has been terrific. I mean, people have been really, really embraced it. It's been like lots of excitement, lots of energy. Our Discord, people seem to love it, and like I said earlier, people play it like, and they want more stuff. Like I'm doing my best to like get more stuff out for it because they're using it because it's a scenario based game. So you have these like monstrous threats, which are like little 2-sheet scenarios, and people were just burning through them, and I was like, oh man, I gotta get some more. So I came up with a plan to release like seasonal releases for it. So we just released season 2, which has a new playbook and some new threats and a new mastermind. The mastermind's like the campaign structure, and that just came out a couple weeks ago. And we did a contest recently for people to write their own scenarios for the game, and we got 45 submissions for that. We just wrapped up the judging on the contest, but we haven't announced the winners or anything yet. But that was another sort of like, okay, here's another chance for, if you just need something for The Between to run, we have all these like, these sort of third party like player, fan created scenarios for you to like check out, right? And that's been great. The level of creativity and writing talent is way off the charts as far as those 45 scenarios go, and we've decided to pick up a few of those for publication as well. And so Yeah, something that we like to do in the Gauntlet is we put out a game and then we like invite people to like make things for it, right? In different ways. And so we did that with Trophy as well. We had contests and things to kind of encourage people to make scenarios for it. So
that's cool. Yeah, no, I saw with Trophy, like, I love that, like, when you, like, if you do research about Trophy, you know, it's one of the first things is like, you know, make content based off Trophy. Here's how you do it. And I love that approach to like be very, I mean, it doesn't surprise me coming from the Gauntlet, which is a community. So like,
community focused,
be community focused, so you're going to always be community forward, but like, you know, to be community focused for everything, so that like, hey, we're releasing Trophy, we're going to be community focused and community forward, which is really cool.
It's just, it's fun, right? I mean, it's a good way of doing it. There's no part of me at all that wants to like keep our games under lock and key and like, you know, there's certain, we have like, there are certain limitations. We don't let people like use our logos and stuff like that. But like, but we're otherwise pretty open about like people can make and sell stuff as they wish for these games. Because the way I look at it is, I mean, it's just another way of like getting engagement with people, right? I mean, you know, in this day and age, in the hobby right now, it's hard to get people like to keep their attention, right? And having like a really vibrant creative community around your game is just another way of like keeping people's attention on the game. But that's secondary to me. I just love it. I just think it's really fun. I just like to see what people are doing, and where we're able to like publish something from people, we do. I mean, like you know, sometimes something will happen in one of the contests or somebody will make something and I'll be like, that's pretty cool. Like, let me make you an offer and we'll publish this and it'll be great. And so, it's a nice kind of virtuous circle, I guess. They're having fun. We're having fun. We're all being helped by it. And we have lots of, in the Trophy, around Trophy especially, there's lots of like publishers who kind of like, you know, like small publishers who kind of got their start with Trophy stuff, right? And so we do as much as we can to support those folks as well, you know, like, and their games they made. We in the past during Zine Quest, we've done this thing where we like give out little loans to people to set up their Zine Quest page and to get some art and stuff for their book, as long as they're doing something related to one of our games. And so we've always had a lot of uptake on that for Trophy. And so, lots of cool little Trophy projects came out of Zine Quest, and we helped in a small way with that. And, you know, we just, it's just how we do it in the Gauntlet Publishing. We just like that community aspect. It's just,
but it's savvy.
It's enjoyable.
It is savvy what you said about, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think like there's few harder things right now, right? Whether you're in publishing or you're in, you know, whatever way you're in this industry, like whether that's you're publishing games or whether that's you're like entertainment focused or you're, you know, doing kind of content creation like we do at All Ports Open, like everybody's competing for attention, attention, and we're competing against so many other things competing for attention. So like the idea that like that helps hold and keep attention is savvy.
You know, I find that, you know, as a person who creates podcasts and Twitch streams and things, this is maybe something you've thought about, but like for me, when it comes to this industry, whether you're making podcasts or whether you're making games or whatever you're doing, you have to really, really be clear with yourself about what your goals are. And you have to be ready for that goal to maybe in the beginning be just because you want to do it, because it's fun, right? That sometimes has to be the goal, right? I give this advice to podcasters all the time. It's like, look, your first few episodes especially, no one's going to listen to them. It's going to be really hard. You're going to have to work really hard to get people to listen to your show.
Oh yeah.
And so
harder than you ever
need
can
to
imagine.
be really, you've got to be really honest with yourself about that. And you have to be like, look, you have to know that going into it, and you have to be really, really honest with yourself about what your goals are for making the show. And it's a perfectly valid goal to just do it because you want to do it, because it's fun, because you want to chat with your friends, because you want to put something out in the world. That's a perfectly valid goal. You know, it's maybe a harder goal if your goal is to, you know, be off to the races right away and making, you know, getting tons of Patreon subscriptions or getting lots of viewers or whatever, right? Like maybe you'll catch lightning in a bottle, who knows? But if you want your show to keep going, you just have to really manage your expectations and manage what your goals are. And what's great about our approach, at least, that I recommend to anyone, is we take this very like long view and this very like, how do we make everything as evergreen as possible, right? So when we're making a podcast, especially our more current podcasts, we didn't do this so much in the early days, but when we're making a podcast, we make every episode as if like it is perfectly evergreen. Like no matter when someone finds this, even if they find it 5 years from now, it's going to feel relevant, right? It's not going to be super dated. It's not going to have a lot of like dated talk in it. It's not going to have like current politics or anything. It's going to be super, super like an evergreen sort of thing, so that because people will find it, like people still find our old retired shows every day, you know, and they're getting something out of it, and that's awesome. And it's the same with games. I mean, you know, we put out a game. It's, you know, I put out Brindlewood Bay, and I worked on Brindlewood Bay, getting it out there for like, you know, almost 2 years, just getting people interested in playing it, right? And I just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. And my hope is that it will continue to be a thing, you know, and that people will keep finding it. And so it's a slightly different approach. It's an approach that says, okay, let's take our time to build a fan base. Let's take our time to let things simmer, and let's make a thing so that no matter when somebody finds it, it'll be good for them. You know, it's like this. There's this quote from I think RuPaul said it. I heard RuPaul say it once, but the quote was basically, someone new turns 18 every single day. And that's kind of the way I look at everything we do in the Gauntlet. Like someone finds something we did every day, right? Like some brand new person. And and that's what I hold on to. You know,
that's
what
really
I hold
good.
on to.
And you just reminded me of, I recently heard somebody talk about how they started watching Drag Race now, but they started watching like the first season of Drag Race, and everybody else in society has stopped talking about those 13 years ago, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and this person just wants someone else to talk to about this thing that they just got into. But that's true. I mean, like I have a podcast that's essentially defunct in the church world. And like, sometimes on very rare occasions, I'll go in and look at the numbers of that podcast just because it still exists on the internet. And I'm shocked at how many hundreds of people still are listening to this podcast that doesn't come out anymore.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, and you know, and for me, that's kind of what it's all about. I mean, I'm in it for the long haul. You know, I mean, I don't need our publishing business to like, you know, be doing $1 million Kickstarters within a year, you know. I mean, that'd be great, but like, it's not like I'm okay with, if that takes a few years, fine. If we never reach that point, that's fine. I mean, we'll just keep steady at it. You know, it's like it's the tortoise catching the hare, right? I mean, that's kind of our approach. It's like, let's just do it right. Let's take our time if we have to. And along the way, we'll try to get as many people as we can to get excited about it and about what we're doing and about stuff, and just keep building that community slowly. You know?
Well, whether intentionally or unintentionally, like that's sort of do you feel like there's sort of maybe there's sort of the elephant in the room right now with indie TTRPGs, like you mentioned, $1 million Kickstarter. Like, do you think there's a jealousy phenomenon in sort of the indie RPG scene? Like, do you and I'm of course the elephant in the room being Avatar, but you know, is there like a, you know, what are your thoughts about that? Is there like a jealousy thing around indie?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I know all those people, all the Magpie people. I've known them from way back,
right?
And we're not close, but I followed them for a long time, and I know where they started, right? And I know how they got where they're at. You know, I mean, like, I would not call it an overnight success. I mean, they were, the very first game they put out, I think, was like in 2010 or 2011. And I remember it was called Our Last Best Hope. It was The Play's the Thing, and then Our Last Best Hope. And those were not gigantic games, but they were something that you could build off of, right? And then they did Urban Shadows, and then they did Masks and Bluebird's Bride, and like, you know, and it's been a steady climb for them, right? I mean, you can see their steady climb, and Avatar is them enjoying the spoils of that of that thing they built, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't personally have any jealousy. Like I look at that as aspirational, you know, like to the extent that I want my business to be successful, I would like to emulate what they've done, right? I mean, I don't know what that means for us, you know, at this moment necessarily, but I look at like Free League, I look at Magpie, I look at Modifius to some degree, Evil Hat to some degree. I look at them and I think, and I see like I see a lane, I see a path, right? like I know what we do differently, and I know what our strengths are,
right?
And so it's all about like finding what our strengths are, and taking what maybe some ideas of what they've done, and like incorporating our particular strengths into that to try to do what we can do, you know, and you know, I feel really confident that, you know, we may never, I mean, Avatar is pretty exceptional as far as licenses go. Like, I don't think we'll ever achieve that. But you know, Trophy did, I don't know, between Kickstarter and backer kit about $300,000 or so. Like that's not nothing.
It's not small.
that was only our second standalone game, right? So like I can see a path for us as far as that goes. As far as other people in the industry, I don't know. I mean, again, it all just comes down to like expectation setting and goals and what you want out of it. You know, if you want to try to be a full-time role-playing game designer, that's a hard ass road to be on, but you can do it. It's not impossible. You just have to you got to be really intentional about your choices, and you have to make some sacrifices. And you have to really, really manage your expectations, but you can do it. If you are just doing this because you find it to be fun and you don't really care how many copies of something you sell, that's also totally valid, right? Something I sort of, I don't love about the current discourse in the last couple of years is this idea that like nothing can be like done for hobby reasons. Like everything has to be paid, everything has to be, you know, this or that. And that's sure. I mean, like if someone's making money and they're asking you to do something for free, well, that's not right. But I think it's just as valid for people to say, I want to do this because I love it, right? Like that's okay. Like if someone wants to make a game and put it out for nothing or give it away or just charge $1 for it, that is not for me to judge, right? Like if that's because they're getting something out of that experience that maybe I'm not aware of, right? I don't put my games on sale. Our games never go on sale unless it's like an official drive-through sale or something, right? Like, or part of bundle of holding, like because that's just our approach. Like, I think that they're already underpriced, right? And so I don't want to go any lower, right? But, and we have business considerations because we have bills to pay, right? But other people have different goals and desires. I'm sure a lot of people are pissed about the Magpie situation and about Avatar because Magpie has kind of a rough history with people, like personality wise, you know, and there's a lot of conflict there, and I get that. But I don't know. I mean, I know how they got there. I saw it happen and I watched it. I was, you know, somewhat close to it for a little bit. Like I saw it, you know, and to me, there's nothing surprising about it. Like you can totally see that trajectory. Right? So,
well, it surprised me only in this, I guess. I do think the scale to some degree surprised me. And I guess maybe it shouldn't have in that
the scale for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Like I knew Avatar was popular. I knew that Avatar was more popular maybe now than ever. Like that it had recaptured because like my own children discovered it and we all rewatched it as a family. So like I've seen that happen, and yet the scale still kind of
the scale of it was definitely shocking, for sure. But then I don't know, like, you know, I to me, like, I mean, the scale was really high, but that being like their first $1 million+ Kickstarter, there was nothing about that surprising to me. I mean, you could see the path, right? You could see you could see the trail they laid and how they got there.
But you know, you were saying about the dollar, you know, whatever the hop, like that kind of goes back a little bit to like we were talking about before with itch, and like that's what makes I think itch so. What I think the phenomena itch as like a platform for releasing games, what makes it work is like. It can be a place where somebody like releases a small game they have for $1, $2, $3, while also supporting people who sell their games for like bigger games or full books or whatever for larger amounts. And like I think that what that does is it makes the space for what we were talking about before that itch does, which is like be an explosive place of creativity and energy where there's just like talk about throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. I mean, like it's just like everything. Like it's like an overwhelming amount of creativity and like possibility and like games of all kinds of scales. And that's why I think, I don't know, I love that. Like I love that there are people who, like you said, are sort of like, hey, I'm not doing this because I have aspirations to do $1 million Kickstarter. I'm doing this because I love it and I made this thing I want to sell you for $2 because you should, you know, because I want to get paid $2 for my work or whatever, you know. And but I think that's what leaves the door open to so much creativity.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of variables, right? I mean, it's a complex question in the sense that I think there's a lot of variables there. I mean, there's some people who are probably definitely undervaluing their work.
Well, I
think should say most of them are.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
There are people who probably feel a lot of pressure not to charge X amount of dollars or to charge X amount of dollars. I mean, there's lots of variables in terms of like quality and different things. And itch is such a Wild West kind of thing that's really hard to like, I find it hard to like say anything definitive about itch. I find it really fascinating, and our games are not on there. That's the decision we've made for different business reasons, but and I don't know if we ever will. But I can definitely see. Itch feels like the future. I just don't know what that future is. You know, it's that kind of thing. You know, it feels like it still feels very nascent, but the energy level is so high that you feel like something is going to happen there that's really cool and era defining, right? I just don't know what that is yet. I don't know. I hope that, you know, I love to see people create, and I think it's great that, you know, that people are doing that. Like, so we published this magazine, Codex, right? Which is essentially like just little small form games, like a bunch of them bundled up into a magazine that
with a bunch of really
themed.
Awesome art. If people don't know, I don't know if anyone watching hasn't ever seen one, but you should go check them out because
it's gorgeous.
Awesome. They're so cool.
Yeah, thank you. But kind of like, you know, what became sort of our goal, especially about a year or so into it, was giving people giving new writers, new RPG creators a platform to get their stuff seen by an audience, right? And interestingly, I actually think itch has sort of made Codex obsolete in this way, right? Because now they have itch. They can go on itch, and they can, if they're willing to put in the hustle, they can get their stuff seen. I think there's still a place for Codex as far as like,
I was gonna say, I don't know, I might
highlighting things. I mean, my business partner and I, we go back and forth on this because like I'm not as committed to Codex, I think, as he is, but like I just have a different vision for it, I think. But like I think there's a future for Codex where it's maybe a little different than what it has been traditionally.
Okay.
But what it used to be was a really, really great platform for like new writers to get their stuff seen. And I think it is still that. But certainly the itch landscape has certainly is a big change from when we started, you know?
Sure.
And
well, I'll just say this. My pushback on it would be, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this because he's probably in the chat. I think he's watching this, but like, I will not forget when my very, very dear friend Blaine Martin had a game published in Codex, and I'll never forget the like excitement, the like energy, the like you know how much that meant to him, what it meant for him as someone who does a podcast. You Are Not Alone, and like as a game designer, like you said, like your goal of getting new game designers seen, that was such a big deal.
That's great. I'm really happy to hear that. Actually, that's awesome.
So
yeah,
like,
that's really awesome.
So I think that's such a different thing than being like, oh, I put a game up on itch, because like,
yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, you might be convincing me right now in this moment.
I mean, I'm kind of trying to, in the sense that like I can give you a personal story, right, of somebody who experienced it. It's a different
fair.
experience because like seeing your work in Codex, seeing the art that's with it, seeing the layout, how beautiful
really polished,
it is,
right? That's
really polished,
yeah.
And like having it have the force of being a part of Codex and the Gauntlet behind it is such a cool thing that I think like there's definitely, to me, I see a value personally in that.
Okay, I'm sold.
There we go.
You sold me on my magazine. Thank you.
Wait a second. What just happened here? No, so what do you is there anything you're designing right now? Like, what's a lot of your energy going into? What are you working on right now?
That's great. Thank you. That's a good question. So I have a few projects. I'm super creatively, at least I'm very, very focused on my mystery system that came out of Brindlewood Bay and the Between. I think that it's a really, really rich like opportunity for like mystery genre role-playing games. I think I feel like I kind of cracked open the genre a little bit, like, because I think that mystery games are kind of hard to do prior to Brindlewood Bay. And so I'm really excited to kind of like keep going with that. And so the next game I have that's going to be out probably early next year is called Pizza Time. And Pizza Time is about a Chuck E. Cheese style restaurant that is closing down.
This is amazing already. Sorry, I'm getting so
it's okay.
excited.
Yeah, and you are a group of people who have paid a large sum of money to come stay overnight.
What?
The last night that it's going to be open, but historically, the restaurant has had some kids go missing, and so what you're also doing is trying to figure out what happened to those kids.
Oh my God, it's so
while
awesome.
You're enjoying your last night at the restaurant's called Calamity Raccoon's Good Time Pizza Farm. While you're spending your last night at Calamity's, you are also trying to it ends up being like a whole week of play, but there's like one big kind of final night at the restaurant, but you're trying to figure out like what happened to these kids, and the characters are also processing like their own trauma like from their childhood as well, so it's kind of got that emotional element to it. So it's like all my games, it has this camp element, it's got this horror element, but it also has this kind of like personal kind of emotional element as well. So I'm really excited about Pizza Time. It's a fun it's a straight horror game. It's really just quite horror focused. But I think people really enjoy it.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing! I'm so excited about that game.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
You need playtesters.
Anyway. Yeah, I think it's I think people will like it a lot. And then my friend Mike Martins and we are working on a game called Singapore. And Singapore is inspired by the video game Return of the Obra Dinn, as well as this old Tom Waits song called Singapore. And you play people in this like kind of, it's not the real world, it's kind of like a fantasy world, but you play people on a ship and you're going from port to port, and you have these like shipboard mysteries you have to like solve while you're going to the different ports. And at the end, you are either going to reach Singapore, the fabled Singapore, or you are going to get eaten by a kraken. So those are the two things that might happen. But yeah, it's kind of a shipboard mystery game. I'm pretty excited about that. Mike had this really great trophy game that was part of Zine Quest called Sunken. And so Mike has a lot of experience with writing in the genre, and I'm a former sailor. So we're both really passionate about like the genre that we're kind of doing, because I feel like there haven't been a lot of good shipboard games yet. And so I'm excited to do that. Cool. And then I've got some other things I'm not sure if I can talk about yet, but those are the two things that are kind of on the radar really prominently right now as far as things I'm working on. So look forward to those. And then bigger picture, we have we're testing out a podcast to support Brindlewood Bay and the mystery system. We're not quite sure if that's going to be an ongoing thing, but we've done some tests. We've done a test episode. We're going to kind of see how we feel about it. So we'll see how that goes. And Brindlewood Bay itself is hopefully going to Kickstarter in January. It was not Kickstarted. It was just released through drive-through. Right. We're going to do like a big glossy deluxe edition of the game on Kickstarter in January. So yeah, those are some things coming up for Gauntlet Publishing.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing about the upcoming stuff too, and the stuff that you're working on. That's really exciting. I got really excited about that pizza game, but I think
you'll love it. I think it's gonna be fun. It's a really fun game.
By the way, earlier in the chat, somebody from Poland had mentioned like the idea of like trying to find non-D&D games and having trouble finding D&D, like finding games to play in. So can you tell people, like, if they are looking to play games like with the Gauntlet, how do they start? Like, where do you start doing that?
Great question. So that's not the side of the organization I'm really a part of lately anymore, but I don't run it anymore. But you can go to patreon.com/Gauntlet, and there is a level there. It's the $10 pledge level. And when you pledge at that level, you get access to, you get like basically RSVP priority to games that the Gauntlet runs. Now, that's the best way of doing it, in my opinion, because then you kind of go to the Gauntlet Slack and you kind of people will show you like how to get involved in the games. But there is a calendar. It's a public calendar. As long as there's space in the game and it's open, it's past that RSVP priority period, anyone can play. But probably the best thing to do, just like kind of big picture, is go to gauntlet-rpg.com. And when you go to gauntlet-rpg.com, there is a section, and I have to apologize, I have to look it up really quick.
That's okay.
There is a section that's called, it's a drop down on the menu. Gauntlet Online is the drop down. And the very first thing is playing online with the Gauntlet. So if you click on that, it's going to give you all the information you need. So
I'm going to share that link right now in the chat here. And I will also be sure to put like links to all this stuff in the show notes for people watching this later. So,
I'll also say, if you want to join the Gauntlet Publishing Discord or the Trophy Discord, and I can give you those links later, Ben.
Yeah.
We just randomly post games there too. They're not as structured as what the community side of the Gauntlet does, but we just put up like, somebody just wants to run a game, so like we'll kind of post there. Something I do, which is maybe different from a lot of other publishers, is I still run lots of games. Like
really?
I run games 4 times a week still.
Wow.
In addition to all my other duties, I do that. So it's public stuff. Like if I have space, people can join. So yeah, I'm always doing that. So.
And the Discords, I was going to ask you, are public. They're not Patreon walled or
no. Yeah, anybody can join those. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Very cool. Well, great. Yeah, if you could give me those links later, I'll make sure to put all that stuff in the show notes for sure. So, any last plugs? I tried to cover as much as we could.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe just follow us on Twitter.
Yeah.
Our main account is at Gauntlet RPG, and then Gauntlet Publishing has an account as well. It's at Gauntlet Pub. And then if you specifically want to follow Brindlewood Bay, it's at Brindlewood Bay. And then I am at Jason Cordova 6. And Trophy is at Trophy RPG. So we're very active on Twitter.
Awesome. Jason, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We should follow through on having you back on, like we said, because I would love. We didn't talk about sailing, and that's mind-boggling to me. I want to talk about sailing. I want to talk about the lawyer stuff. We didn't get to have time to talk about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
There's lots of stuff we could talk about in the future. But thank you for taking the time to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a joy. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Jason to keep hanging out here in my little internet digital green room, but I'm going to go back to just us, me and you, audience. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Jason again for, who's hanging out here with me online, for being a guest on the show. I really appreciate the time. Go check out the Gauntlet. Check out all the stuff we talked about tonight. You will not be disappointed. Hey folks, while you're on here, could you please hit follow? I would really appreciate it if you hit the follow button here on my show so you can watch more content like this week to week. Next week we have Meg Baker coming on the show. The week after that we have Ebediah Ravishall coming on the show. So there's going to be really awesome sort of spooky season guests that you're not going to want to miss the next couple of weeks. And so hit follow so that you don't miss anything. And consider subscribing also. You can hit subscribe. Is subscribe? No, it's not. It's not subscribe, or maybe it is. You can sub, as they say here on my channel, whatever that stands for. If you only caught part of tonight's episode, you'll be able to watch it on demand on Twitch for a brief time. But you can go to allportsopen.com, which is our network website, allportsopen.com, and you can watch every episode of this show afterward. You can also go to allportsopen.com. I'm sorry, you can go to allportsopen on YouTube. Maybe you're watching this on YouTube right now. You can go to allportsopen on YouTube, and you can see all of our great video content there. So check out our shows. Speaking of masks, we mentioned on this show, I run a Masks Actual Play podcast called Delinquent Comics that I'm quite proud of, and I think is really, really awesome. I think if you like Powered by the Apocalypse, you'd really, really like it. So it's called Delinquent Comics and can be found at All Ports Open or wherever podcasts are found. If you like story games, Apon Games is going to start releasing games, and I can tell you, like I said at the beginning of the show, that the first one, the Hard Lessons that we played, I got to play it. I had nothing to do with writing it other than looking at it. So I'm just telling you as a player, that game was super good. So if you can follow us at patreon.com/AponGames, I think is that link. But if you go to allportsopen.com, you'll find everything. everything there. So, okay, huge thanks to Joshua Wise, my Apon co-founder, for the artwork you see here on the screen on my stream, for everything he does for the All Ports Open Network, which is a lot. Thanks to Doctor Octoroc for the use of his music on my show that you heard at the beginning, and you'll hear again in just a minute. I have been That Gamer Priest. Come back next week for Meg Baker. Seriously, like, do not miss it. It's going to be awesome. And enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours, my friends. I truly hope you all have a awesome night.
What is it, honey?
It's that darn ghost again. He just won't leave us alone. I guess we're just going to have to move.
No, wait. Don't worry. We're not moving. He is.
Who are you going to call?
Blockbusters. Actually, we know nothing about catching ghosts other than what we saw in that old cartoon. But if you want a podcast where we talk about film, TV, random tangents that leave you wondering what the hell was that all about, and the occasional nugget of wisdom, then we're the ones for you. And if you act now, you can listen to our entire back catalogue for free.
Did you say free?
Yes, I did. So go now to your nearest podcatching device, shake off the ectoplasm, and download us today. Warning, listening to Blowbusters can lead to stomach cramps from laughing, headaches from attempting to remember what tangent they went on this time, and a worn-out section of your device's screen/keyboard as you smash the replay button over and over until the next episode arrives. If your Blowbusters episode lasts longer than 4 hours, tell your doctor so he can listen as well.